Elliot Harper lived a quiet, predictable life in his small apartment on the outskirts of the city. He was a man who preferred solitude over socializing, finding comfort in coding lines of software and scrolling through online shopping sites during late nights. His collection of gadgets, books, and random knickknacks filled every corner of his home, but none of them brought him any real joy. That changed one ordinary Tuesday morning when something extraordinary arrived at his doorstep. It was just after sunrise when Elliot heard the soft thud of a package landing outside his door. He shuffled out of bed, still wearing yesterday's rumpled clothes, and opened the front door with a yawn. There it sat, a sleek black box no larger than a shoebox, wrapped in smooth metallic material that shimmered faintly under the sunlight. What caught his attention most was the lack of markings. No return address, no logo, nothing to indicate where it had come from or what it contained. Curiosity gnawed at him. Who would send him something so mysterious? He picked up the box cautiously, surprised by how light it felt. As he turned it over in his hands, he noticed a faint hum emanating from within, almost like the sound of electricity crackling faintly beneath its surface. The sensation sent a shiver down his spine, though he couldn't tell if it was excitement or unease. Back inside, Elliot placed the box on his cluttered dining table and stared at it for a moment. What could possibly be inside? He muttered aloud. With trembling fingers, he pressed down gently on the lid. To his astonishment, the box didn't open conventionally. It seemed to unfold itself, petals of metal peeling back like flower blossoms until they revealed a glowing, pulsating core. The light grew brighter, filling the room with an eerie yet beautiful luminescence. And then, without warning, the air around the box shimmered and a figure stepped out. Elliot stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his chair. Standing before him was a woman unlike anyone he'd ever seen. Her skin glowed faintly, as though lit from within, and her eyes sparkled with colors that shifted between blue, green, and gold. She wore flowing garments made of some kind of silvery fabric that shimmered like liquid moonlight. Her presence was both mesmerizing and intimidating, leaving Elliot frozen in place. "I'm yours now," she said, her voice melodic and calm, carrying an accent he couldn't place. Before Elliot could respond, or even process what she meant, her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor. For a moment, all Elliot could do was stare, his heart pounding wildly. Was this some elaborate prank, a hallucination, or had he truly just unboxed an alien? He hesitated, unsure whether to call the authorities, run away, or help her. But when he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest, he knew there was only one thing he could do. Swallowing hard, he bent down and carefully lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, almost weightless, and her skin radiated warmth against his fingertips. As he carried her to the couch, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn into the unknown, and that nothing would ever be the same again. Elliot paced nervously around his apartment, glancing at the unconscious woman lying on his couch. Her shimmering form seemed to glow faintly even in the dim light of the room, and her presence made everything feel surreal. He had no idea what to do next. Should he call someone? The police? A scientist? But how could he explain this impossible situation? His thoughts were interrupted when she stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, she looked disoriented, her glowing eyes scanning the room before settling on Elliot. She sat up slowly, her movements graceful yet deliberate, as if testing whether her body still worked properly. "Who are you?" Elliot blurted out, taking an instinctive step back. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the mix of fear and curiosity swirling inside him. The woman tilted her head, studying him with an expression that was both curious and calm. "I am Lyra 7, she said, her melodic voice filling the silence. "And as I told you earlier, I'm yours now." Elliot blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "Wait, what does that mean? Why did you say that?" Lyra smiled faintly, though there was a sadness behind her eyes that Elliot couldn't quite understand. "It means we are bonded," she explained. "My people have a process called claiming. When one of us chooses a partner from another species, we form a connection, a symbiotic bond. It allows us to share abilities, emotions, and sometimes even parts of our lives." Elliot stared at her, his mind racing. This was too much to take in. An alien claiming him. What kind of twisted cosmic joke was this? "But why me?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for any of this." Lyra's gaze softened. "You may not have asked, but fate brought me here. Your energy resonated with mine across vast distances. That is why I chose you." Before Elliot could respond, strange things began happening around the room. The lamp on the side table flickered, then turned off completely. Books slid off the shelves without being touched, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Elliot spun around, panic rising in his chest. "What's going on?" "It's the bond," Lyra said calmly, standing up. "Our connection has already begun forming. You'll start noticing changes, not just in your surroundings, but within yourself." Elliot shook his head, backing away until his back hit the wall. "This can't be real. Aliens, bonds, glowing boxes. It's insane." Lyra stepped closer, her luminous eyes locking onto his. "I know it's overwhelming, but you must trust me. My arrival was not random. There are forces hunting me, forces that will stop at nothing to destroy what we've started." Her words sent a chill down Elliot's spine. "Hunting you? What do you mean?" She hesitated, her expression darkening. "My people, they don't approve of bonding with outsiders. They see it as a threat to their power. If they find me, and you, they won't hesitate to eliminate us both." Elliot felt the weight of her words sink in. This wasn't just some bizarre encounter, it was dangerous. And somehow, he was caught right in the middle of it. Despite his fear, something about Lyra tugged at him. Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice or the vulnerability in her eyes. Whatever it was, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Not yet. "So, what happens now?" he asked cautiously. Lyra offered him a small, hopeful smile. "Now we prepare. Together." As she spoke, the hum in the room faded, and the objects that had moved settled back into place. For a brief moment, everything felt almost normal. Almost. But deep down, Elliot knew his life would never be the same again. Over the next few days, Elliot tried to adjust to the surreal reality of having an alien living in his apartment. Lyra seemed perfectly content exploring every corner of his home, her glowing presence making even mundane objects look extraordinary. She examined his books with fascination, ran her fingers over his laptop as if it were a relic from another world, and marveled at the simple act of turning on a faucet. To her, Earth was a place of endless wonder. And Elliot found himself watching her with growing curiosity. But their newfound normalcy was fragile. Every time Elliot thought he might get used to the situation, something strange would happen. One evening, while they sat together on the couch, Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his arm. A sudden warmth spread through him, followed by a rush of images that weren't his own, vivid flashes of towering crystalline trees, bioluminescent skies, and cities floating among the clouds. He gasped, pulling away instinctively. What was that?" he stammered, clutching his chest as if trying to steady his racing heart. "It's part of the bond," Lyra explained gently. "Our connection allows us to share memories, emotions, and experiences. That was my homeworld. A place I haven't seen in years." Elliot stared at her, equal parts amazed and unsettled. "You're showing me your past. Just like that." Lyra nodded. "The bond is growing stronger. Soon, you'll begin experiencing other changes too. Not just visions, but abilities. You'll see." "Abilities?" Elliot echoed, his voice tinged with skepticism. "What kind of abilities?" She smiled faintly, standing up and extending her hand toward a glass on the table. Without touching it, The glass lifted into the air, hovering for a moment before gently returning to its spot. Elliot's jaw dropped. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Not for us," Lyra replied. "Once fully bonded, humans can access latent powers they never knew they had. Telekinesis, heightened senses, even glimpses of the future. It's all possible." Elliot wanted to argue, to dismiss this as some elaborate trick, but deep down, he knew she wasn't lying. After everything he'd seen, how could he deny it? Still, the idea of gaining superhuman abilities felt absurd and terrifying. As the days passed, Lyra continued teaching him about her people and her culture. She described her homeworld in breathtaking detail. Rivers that flowed upward instead of down, creatures that sang melodies only heard in dreams, and stars so close you could almost touch them. But beneath her awe-inspiring stories lay a darker truth. Her exile hadn't been voluntary. She'd fled after opposing her government's plans to exploit interdimensional travel for conquest. They feared outsiders because they saw them as threats, Lyra admitted one night, her voice heavy with regret. "When I defied them, they'd branded me a traitor. Now they'll stop at nothing to bring me back, or silence me forever." Elliot frowned, leaning forward in his chair. Why come here, though? Why Earth? Her gaze softened as she looked at him. "I believed Earth held hope for allies who could help fight against tyranny. And when I sensed your energy calling to me, I knew you were someone special, someone brave enough to stand with me." Elliot didn't feel particularly brave. If anything, he felt overwhelmed. Yet there was something about Lyra's unwavering faith in him that made him want to believe, to try. For the first time in years, he felt connected to something bigger than himself. As the bond between them strengthened, Elliot began noticing subtle changes within him. Objects occasionally moved without his conscious effort, and he started sensing emotions more acutely, especially Lyra's. It was strange, yes, but also exhilarating. Little by little, he was becoming someone new, someone stronger. And yet, the looming threat of her pursuers cast a shadow over everything. No matter how much they bonded or how many secrets they shared, danger was closing in, and neither of them could escape it forever. The uneasy calm that had settled over Elliot and Lyra's life shattered one chilly morning. As Elliot sipped his coffee at the kitchen counter, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass through their quiet neighborhood, but this one stayed put, its tinted windows reflecting the pale sunlight. Something about it felt off. "Lyra," Elliot called out, gesturing toward the window. "Do you see that car?" Lyra walked over, her glowing eyes narrowing as she peered outside. For a moment, she was silent, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, her body tensed. "They'd found us," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "Who?" Elliot asked, though deep down, he already knew the answer. "The ones hunting me." Her hands clenched into fists, and the air around them seemed to hum faintly, a sign of her distress. "We need to leave. Now." Elliot hesitated, torn between panic and disbelief. "Leave? Just like that? What about my job, my stuff, my whole life?" "This isn't just about you anymore," Lyra said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If they catch us, they won't hesitate to kill you. Is your normal life worth dying for?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. As much as he wanted to cling to the safety of routine, he couldn't ignore the truth. Staying meant risking everything, including Lyra. And despite his fear, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Within minutes, they were packing essentials into a duffel bag. Clothes, food, and a few gadgets Elliot hoped might come in handy. Lyra insisted on bringing nothing but a small pendant she wore around her neck, claiming it held significance beyond material value. As they prepared to leave, Elliot glanced at the car again and froze. Two men in dark suits had stepped out, their sharp eyes scanning the building. "They're coming," he hissed, grabbing Lyra's hand. "We have to go." They slipped out through the back door, hearts pounding as they hurried down the alleyway. The cold wind bit at their faces, but neither dared slow down. Behind them, they heard faint footsteps echoing against the walls. Someone was following them. "This way," Lyra urged, pulling Elliot into a narrow passageway between two buildings. They ducked behind a stack of crates, holding their breath as the footsteps grew louder. Peering cautiously around the corner, Elliot saw one of the men stop nearby, speaking into a device on his wrist. "They're tracking us somehow," Lyra whispered, her brow furrowed. "It must be residual energy from the bond. It leaves a trace." Elliot swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Can we block it? Hide it?" She shook her head grimly. "Not easily. But there's another option." Before Elliot could ask what she meant, Lyra pressed her palm against his chest. A surge of warmth radiated outward, and suddenly the world around them blurred. Colors shifted, sounds distorted, and for a brief moment, Elliot felt weightless, as if he were being pulled apart and reassembled somewhere else. When the sensation faded, they stood in a deserted park miles away from his apartment. "What was that?" Elliot gasped, clutching his knees as he tried to steady himself. "A temporary rift," Lyra explained, breathing heavily. "It's risky, but it buys us time." Elliot stared at her, awe mixing with fear. "You can do that. Just teleport." "Only short distances," she admitted, "and only when absolutely necessary. It drains me." As they caught their breath, Elliot realized they were far from safe. Whoever these men were, they wouldn't give up easily. But for now, they had escaped, and that gave him a sliver of hope. Together, they would face whatever came next, because running wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting each other and finding a way to fight back. The park was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Elliot leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath while Lyra scanned their surroundings with sharp, glowing eyes. The adrenaline from their narrow escape still coursed through him, but exhaustion was beginning to creep in. His mind raced with questions. Where would they go next? How could they possibly stay ahead of those relentless pursuers? "We can't keep running forever," Elliot said finally, breaking the silence. "They'll find us again." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "You're right, but there's a place we can go, a sanctuary where others like us have found refuge." "Others like us," Elliot echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mean humans bonded with aliens?" "Yes," she replied softly. "Not all humans are alone in this fight. Some have embraced their bonds and banded together to protect each other and to resist my people's oppressive regime." Elliot hesitated, unsure if he could trust strangers with something so bizarre and dangerous. But what choice did they have? Staying on the run wasn't sustainable, and every moment they spent exposed put them at risk. "Where is this sanctuary?" he asked cautiously. "It's hidden deep in the mountains," Lyra explained. "I don't know its exact location, but I can guide you close enough for them to sense our presence. They'll come to us." Elliot sighed, rubbing his temples. This plan felt desperate, even reckless, but desperation had become their default state. "All right," he said firmly. "Let's do it." As they began their journey, Lyra took the opportunity to teach Elliot more about the bond and how to harness the abilities awakening within him. She showed him how to focus his thoughts to move objects with his mind, encouraging him to practice lifting pebbles or bending twigs. At first, Elliot struggled, frustration bubbling over when nothing happened. But slowly, he started to feel a strange pull inside him, a connection between his will and the world around him. "You're doing well," Lyra said one evening as they rested by a campfire. A small rock hovered above Elliot's palm, wobbling slightly before dropping back down. He grinned despite himself, feeling a flicker of pride. "Does this mean I'm becoming superhuman or something?" he joked, though his tone betrayed awe. "In a way," Lyra replied with a smile. "But remember, power without purpose is meaningless. You must use these gifts wisely, to protect, not to harm. Their progress was slow but steady, the days blending into nights as they navigated dense forests and winding roads. Along the way, they encountered challenges, harsh weather, dwindling supplies, and the constant paranoia of being followed. Yet through it all, their bond grew stronger. Elliot found himself sensing Lyra's emotions more clearly, understanding her fears and hopes without her needing to speak. In turn, she guided him with patience and care, helping him unlock new facets of his potential. One night, as they huddled under a canopy of stars, Elliot turned to Lyra. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Why risk everything for someone like me?" She looked at him, her multicolored eyes shimmering in the firelight. "Because you remind me of hope," she said simply. "And because no matter how hard things get, you haven't given up. That makes you extraordinary." Her words lingered in the air, filling Elliot with a mix of gratitude and determination. Whatever lay ahead, he vowed to stand by her side, not just as her partner, but as her ally in the fight to come. Little did they know, their pursuers were closer than ever, watching their every move. After days of relentless travel, Elliot and Lyra finally reached the foothills of the mountains where the sanctuary was said to be hidden. The air grew cooler as they ascended, the dense forest giving way to rocky terrain and jagged cliffs. Despite their exhaustion, there was a glimmer of hope in both their eyes. They were close, so close, to finding safety. As they climbed higher, Lyra paused suddenly, her glowing form shimmering faintly in the dim light of dusk. She closed her eyes, tilting her head as if listening to something only she could hear. "They're near," she murmured. "The others, they've sensed us." Elliot looked around warily, half expecting armed men to emerge from the shadows. But instead, a soft hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. From behind a cluster of boulders stepped three figures, a man, a woman, and an alien being unlike anything Elliot had ever seen. Its elongated limbs shimmered like liquid metal, and its face was smooth, almost featureless, save for two luminous orbs that served as eyes. "You're safe now," the human man said, his voice calm but firm. He introduced himself as Marcus, the leader of the sanctuary community. The woman beside him, Elena, nodded warmly, while the alien simply inclined its head in acknowledgement. Lyra stepped forward, relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she said softly. "We didn't know how much longer we could evade them." Marcus gestured for them to follow. "Come, we'll explain everything once we're inside." The group led Elliot and Lyra through a narrow crevice in the mountain, which opened into a breathtaking hidden valley. Nestled among towering peaks, the sanctuary was a sprawling settlement of makeshift homes, gardens, and communal spaces. Humans and aliens moved about freely, working together in harmony. Children laughed as they played alongside creatures with iridescent scales, while elders shared stories around crackling fires. It was a world unlike any Elliot had imagined, one born of unity and resilience. Inside one of the larger structures, Marcus and Elena sat down with Elliot and Lyra to discuss their situation. Over steaming cups of herbal tea, Lyra revealed the truth about her past, the rebellion she had joined against her oppressive government, her exile, and the faction hunting her. Her voice trembled as she confessed that her arrival on Earth wasn't just about survival. It was about finding allies who could help overthrow the tyranny threatening countless worlds. Elliot listened intently, his heart pounding. "So, what does this mean for us?" he asked, glancing at Lyra. "Are we supposed to join your fight?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze meeting his. "I won't force you into anything. This is your home, your life. But if we don't stand against them, they'll keep coming, not just for me, but for everyone here, for all of humanity." The weight of her words settled heavily on Elliot's shoulders. He thought of the strange abilities he'd begun to master, the bond that connected him to Lyra, and the people in this sanctuary who had already risked so much. Could he really walk away? Or was this his chance to do something meaningful? to make a difference. Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the valley. Shouts echoed in the distance as someone yelled, "They're here." Panic surged through the crowd as ships descended from the sky, their dark forms blotting out the stars. The enemy had found them. Marcus turned to Elliot and Lyra, his expression grim. "This is it. If you're staying, you fight. Are you with us?" Elliot glanced at Lyra, who looked at him with unwavering trust. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "We're with you." Together, they prepared to defend the sanctuary and the fragile hope it represented. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. Chaos erupted in the valley as the enemy ships descended, their engines roaring like thunder. Bright beams of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the sanctuary below. People scrambled to take cover, while others rushed to arm themselves with whatever weapons they could find: improvised tools, energy devices crafted from alien technology, and even raw telekinetic power fueled by bonds like Elliot's. Elliot stood frozen for a moment, his heart hammering in his chest. He had never been in a fight before, let alone one against advanced alien forces. But when he saw Lyra step forward, her glowing form radiating both strength and determination, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting the people who had welcomed them, the bond he shared with Lyra, and the fragile hope that humanity and aliens could coexist peacefully. "Stay close," Lyra said, gripping his hand tightly. Her voice steadied him, grounding him in the present. "Use what I've taught you." With a deep breath, Elliot nodded. Together, they joined the others at the edge of the valley, forming a defensive line against the invaders. The first wave of attackers landed, a group of heavily armored soldiers armed with sleek, otherworldly weapons. Behind them loomed a towering figure cloaked in shadow. Commander Zinar, the leader of the faction hunting Lyra. "You cannot win," Zinar declared, his voice cold and mechanical, amplified across the battlefield. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You underestimate us, Zinar. Humanity is stronger than you think." "And so am I," Zinar sneered, raising a hand to signal his troops to advance. The battle began. Elliot focused all his energy, remembering Lyra's lessons. He raised his hands, feeling the pull of the bond within him. A nearby boulder lifted off the ground, hovering briefly before hurtling toward an approaching soldier, knocking him back. Cheers erupted from the defenders, but there was no time to celebrate. More enemies poured into the valley, firing blasts of energy that lit up the night sky. Lyra moved like a force of nature, her every gesture precise and powerful. She created shimmering shields to block incoming attacks and sent bursts of energy rippling through the air, disarming entire squads of soldiers. Yet despite her prowess, she couldn't fight everyone at once. Elliot did his best to cover her, using his newfound abilities to hurl debris, disarm foes, and protect those around him. Each success filled him with a sense of purpose he'd never known before. The tide of the battle shifted when Marcus unleashed a hidden weapon, an ancient alien artifact capable of generating a massive energy pulse. The blast sent shockwaves through the valley, scattering the enemy forces and disabling several of their ships. But it came at a cost. The artifact overloaded, leaving the defenders vulnerable to counterattacks. In the chaos, Zinar confronted Lyra directly. Their clash was fierce, each blow reverberating like thunder. Lyra fought valiantly, but Zinar's strength was overwhelming. Just as he prepared to deliver a fatal strike, Elliot intervened, summoning every ounce of power he possessed. With a roar, he unleashed a torrent of telekinetic force, sending Zinar crashing to the ground. "We're stronger together," Elliot shouted, standing beside Lyra. Enraged, Zinar lunged again, but this time, Lyra struck true. Summoning a surge of energy, she shattered his armor and left him incapacitated. As the remaining enemy forces retreated, the valley fell silent, save for the sound of ragged breathing and distant cheers. Though victorious, the cost was high. Many defenders lay injured or worse, and Lyra collapsed into Elliot's arms, weakened but alive. Together, they looked out over the battered sanctuary, knowing their fight was far from over, but also knowing they had taken a crucial step toward freedom. The aftermath of the battle left the sanctuary in ruins, its once vibrant beauty now marred by scorch marks and debris. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a sense of quiet triumph. The invaders had been driven back, their leader defeated, and the fragile hope that bound humanity and aliens together had endured. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, the survivors gathered to tend to the wounded, repair what they could, and mourn those they had lost. Elliot sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, his body aching from the fight, but his spirit buoyed by the knowledge that they had won. For now. Lyra joined him moments later, her steps slower than usual, her luminous form dimmed by exhaustion. She lowered herself beside him, leaning against his shoulder as if drawing strength from his presence. "We did it," she said softly, her voice tinged with both relief and sorrow. "But at such a cost." Elliot nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not over, is it? They'll come back." "They might," Lyra admitted. "But this victory proves something important, that we're stronger when we stand together. Humans, aliens, all of us united. That's something they can't destroy." Her words resonated deeply with Elliot. For so long, he had lived a life defined by solitude and routine, never imagining he'd find himself fighting alongside an alien woman for a cause greater than himself. And yet here he was, changed, empowered, and determined to keep going. "We need to prepare," he said firmly, turning to look at her. "If they come again, we have to be ready. Not just to defend ourselves, but to take the fight to them." Lyra smiled faintly, pride shining in her shifting eyes. "You've come so far, Elliot. When I first arrived, you were afraid, uncertain. Now look at you. You're ready to lead." "I'm not leading anything," Elliot replied with a small laugh. "I'm just doing what needs to be done. For you, for them, for everyone who believes in this." Over the following days, the sanctuary began to rebuild, not just physically, but emotionally. The bonds between humans and aliens grew stronger as they worked side by side, sharing skills, stories, and dreams for the future. Elliot threw himself into training others to harness their abilities, teaching them how to use telekinesis, energy manipulation, and teamwork to amplify their strengths. Lyra guided him every step of the way, her wisdom and experience invaluable to the growing resistance. One evening, as the community gathered around a bonfire to celebrate their survival, Marcus stood up to address the crowd. "Tonight, we honor those we've lost and those who fought bravely to protect our home. But let this also be a reminder of why we fight. For freedom, unity, and a better future for all beings." Cheers erupted, echoing through the valley. Elliot watched as people embraced, laughed, and shared meals, their resilience shining brighter than any star in the night sky. He felt a hand slip into his and turned to see Lyra smiling at him. "You saved me," she said quietly, her voice carrying only to him. "Now, let's save everyone else." Elliot squeezed her hand, feeling the surge of determination. Together, they vowed to continue the fight, not just for themselves, but for every world threatened by oppression. Their bond had transformed them, making them more than just individuals. They were part of something greater, a beacon of hope in a vast and uncertain universe. As they stood together under the starlit sky, Elliot knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Their journey was far from over, but neither was their resolve.